happened to the oldest brother, Dan?
Dan lived in Butte. He built an apartment house on Park Street in the, what would that be, the 700 block on Park Street, right across from what used to be the Cottage Market grocery store. Cottage is a washateria now, but the apartment place is still there. And Dan died in the flu epidemic in 1919, along with my Aunt Mary, Grandpa Driscoll's sister, or my Grandpa Driscoll's sister Mary.
Your dad's sister Mary.
My dad's sister Mary, yeah. I get the generations mixed up because I'm working on this all at one time. Yeah, Mary was the oldest, and she died, and Dan died just a couple of weeks later during that flu epidemic.
Did he leave any kids?
No children by his wife. He married a German widow that I don't know whether it's something that you like to talk about, but the family used to call her Mary So Fine, because she was kind of a stuck-up type. She had been married to a doctor before, and she really was a hard woman to live around. Grandma Driscoll's the only one that ever really treated her very kindly. Everybody else kind of made fun of her. But I can remember her. She lived up in those apartments that used to be Dan's. And when we would drive by there, my mom said, she lives up in that top apartment and she never comes out, she never talks to anybody. And I didn't know who she was, And of course at that age I wasn't too curious about who she was talking about. So when Mary died, she left that apartment house to her daughter, Rose Murphy. And when I first went to Butte and went to work for my uncle in the drugstore, Rose Murphy came in and she says, you and I are related, She wasn't the most pleasant woman in the world, so I really didn't want her to expound on it, but God help me, I wish I would have listened to her now. She could have told me a whole lot of things that I don't know. Her mother is buried out at Holy Cross Cemetery, all by herself.
As a Driscoll?
As Mary. Her name was Mary Driscoll. So we have two Mary Driscolls, Dad's sister and
okay.
this Mary.
And then what about your dad's mother, your grandmother? She was Flanagan, right?
She was a Flanagan. Now it turns out that she had a sister that died quite young in Central City, and her dad died down there, John Flanagan. Got that great picture of the two of them, John and Mary, and he died down there, and then when she came up and lived with Grandma and Grandpa in Butte, and when she died, they took her body back down there and buried him with her. I went down there some years back, and I had my kids with me, and the last thing in the world they wanted to do is look for a headstone. So I never did find them.
Yeah.
But there's a Catholic cemetery up on the top of the hill. There's I think 4 cemeteries in Central City. And of course the city of Central City was changing fast. It became a gambling town, and everything has changed there now. The buildings that were down in town were converted to gambling establishments.
Well, now when you said that Frank Flanagan and then your grandfather were mining engineers, you mean surface engineers?
No, they were stationary engineers.
They ran the hoists?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then Honora's 2 kids that she brought with her, where are they? Who are they?
Well, they died apparently fairly young too. God, I can't think offhand what their name was.
Was it Callahan or something?
No. No, I'd have to look that up, Jeff, to find out. Some of these names stick with me forever, and others are not.
Okay, then what about your grandmother and grandfather had several kids now. Who were they, including your father?
Okay, Mary, and then Fritz and Francis married Pat Kane, Dr. Pat Kane. And Jewel, she was older than Fritz. Jewel married Ed Layden, who was a bartender. Uncle Bill, the guy that had the drugstore before me, his name wasn't really Bill, his name was Arthur Leo Driscoll. during I think in the 20s, they had a big Elks convention in Butte, when they had the big elk up on Broadway in Maine, standing up over the traffic lights and everything. The Elks had a thing that they worked on each other. Everybody went around calling each other Bill. Well, the moniker stuck on Bill Driscoll. The stories I heard about him when he was a kid, he was just a miserable little jerk of a kid, but he could outrun my dad. So he'd bait Dad, he'd get out in the back in the barn someplace and he'd say, "You dirty yellow bugger, you dirty yellow coward." And then he'd make damn sure there was a barrel in between them because Dad would start after him and he'd take off running. The only thing he had to do is remember, don't come back too soon, 'cause Dad was very forgiving, but if he caught him right away, he'd beat the hell out of him.
And that was when they lived on Broadway?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, all that family was raised in that house on Broadway Street.
And that was what address was that?
Oh, it's in the 700s, like 735 or something like that. That house later on became Bill and Mary Ann Kane's house. I don't know who lives in there now.
So Fritz married into a family of doctors.
Yeah. There's Pat was the one that she was married to, and Pat had lost an eye when he was very young. But when he looked at you, you knew you were being stared at. Pat had this way of looking tough. He was a little guy.
Now, what was his last name?
Huh?
His last name?
Kane.
Pat Kane.
Pat Kane. I think in the old country they were K-E-A-N-E, Kanes. And sort of like the Driscolls, they say the O'Driscolls dropped the O in the ocean when they came over here. That was an expression I heard from an old Driscoll, so I had to pay attention to it. There's Pat, Rich, and Joe were doctors. John was a dentist. He was in the office with my dad in the Lewishon building. And there was a couple other brothers, Bill and Ed, that died before my time. I don't really know a whole lot about them. One was mining, big in the mining business, and the other one was, I think, a highway engineer, if I'm not mistaken.
And then why did your dad decide to be a dentist? I mean, nobody'd been a dentist before.
Dad started at the University of Montana, and I don't know what, in those days, whether you made up your mind what you wanted to be when you started college or not. But he went out for football there. Dad was a littler guy than I am, but he was a stocky built, tough little bugger. And when he started up there, he was left end, I think, playing at the university. He had played football at Butte High School with Swede Dahlberg and Steve Sullivan and oh God, there's a whole bunch of guys that went on to the university. And pretty soon he was quarterback. In 1917, Dad was quarterback at the University of Montana. I'm pretty proud of that. Mm-hmm. And they had this huge guy, Benz. There was a picture taken of Dad and this Benz, who was the biggest guy on the team. And Dad's standing on this big rock that's still sitting out in the compound in front of Main Hall in Missoula. But anyway, he was the quarterback that year and decided at that time to become a dentist. I think there was a lot of Butte guys going, Jimmy Bertogli and all these guys going down to Creighton, and of course Pat Kane and those guys had gone down there. And he goes down there, and next thing you know, he's quarterbacking for Creighton University. And it's unthinkable right now that a guy his size could do those things. And while he was there, one of the teachers told, one of the Jesuit priests down there told him, "You'll never be a dentist. There's no such thing as a left-handed dentist." So he quit and he went over to Portland to a school they used to call the College of the Pacific or something like that, and finished dental school over there. And it was right after that time that he and Mom got married. Mom had known him in Butte, had known him down in Omaha when he was going to school down there. When I went to Creighton University, God, I don't know how many years later it was, the athletic director down there was Deuce Belford, a guy who had known Dad very well. And of course, I wasn't a jock, so I figured I'm kind of out of the loop on these things. So, one day I said, I really should go introduce myself to Deuce. And I went there and he says, oh, Dan Driscoll. He says, I was wondering when you were going to come in and see me. And I just floored, because how would the guy know me? I hadn't got there through athletics.
Mm-hmm.